Welcome to another exciting episode of Humanity 8.0, a podcast where we talk about movements and initiatives that seek to move humanity to its next epochal iteration. This podcast is brought to you by Witlingo. When it comes to managing a community, one of the keys to success is the ability to effectively communicate with the members of that community. If you are a service coordinator or responsible for community engagement, Witlingo provides a multi-channel, multilingual notification and engagement platform to help you work more efficiently and effectively. For more information, please visit www.witlingo.com. That's www.witlingo.com. And now, here's your host, Dr. Ahmed Bouzid.
Jenna Spinelle, welcome to Humanity 8.0.
Thank you so much for having me. Happy to be here.
Thank you for making the time. As I was telling you, I'm working on this series that I'm hoping to convert into a book of interviews with folks who are doing interesting things when it comes to democracy. I think we are living in interesting times, if I may say so, when it comes to the challenges that democracy not only here, but around the world is facing. And so I think this is an interesting moment. A moment to talk about, where we are, how did we get here, and where do we go from here, and what are our options, and so forth. So I thought I felt you are an interesting person because you are doing work with, tell me if I'm pronouncing correctly, the McCourtney Institute for Democracy.
That's right.
And that's in State College, right?
Yeah, it's based at Penn State University.
Penn State University. Okay, so I'm going to ask you the basic questions at the beginning, and then we're going to go through what I think is an interesting, perhaps, way to tease out the challenges by doing a thought experiment, and hopefully it will be a fun way of touching on the issues by doing that experiment. But tell me, what do you do at the Institute? What is its mission, and what do you hope to accomplish with it?
So the McCourtney Institute is multifaceted. We support faculty research. We support students, helping them secure internships with democracy organizations. We bring speakers to campus. But I spend a lot of my time on our outreach efforts. That includes 2 podcasts that we produce, one called Democracy Works and one called When the People Decide, which is, I believe, how you found me, the work on direct democracy and democratic innovation. And then we also started a podcast network called the Democracy Group, which has about 16 shows produced by a variety of universities and nonprofits and some independently. And that organization aims to help those shows promote one another, help reach a larger audience, help bring different perspectives to listeners that they might not normally seek out on their own in a podcast. Some shows are more to the right, some are more to the left, some have a heterodox point of view. So that has been a fun project to lead as well. And the Democracy Group also runs a student podcast fellowship. So we're helping high school and college students get their voices out there on some of these topics. So I do a lot of different things, but in some ways it's just all one big job and everything kind of links together.
Very interesting. So how did you get to this place?
So my background is in journalism. I have a journalism degree from Penn State. And when I started with the McCourtney Institute about 6 years ago, my colleagues who are my co-hosts on Democracy Works, they had wanted to start a podcast for a while, but didn't really know the first thing about how to do it. And honestly, I didn't really either, but figured it out, got in touch with our local public radio station who helped us get things off the ground. And 6 years later, here we are still doing it. It's been a good way to network and make connections in the field and help get our name out there on campus and beyond.
That's great. Um, so let me ask you, do you see a surge of interest or concern, or energy about the topic of democracy?
Yes, all of the above: interest, concern, and enthusiasm. I think that the 2016 election was an eye-opening moment for a lot of people about how fragile democracy might be. And then that coupled with Brexit and some things that happened in Europe as well. And then those things that concern led to a resurgence of interest in, okay, how do we not just maintain our democracy, but how do we make it stronger, right? How do we improve the systems? How do we give people more of a voice, right? And so I often say that we're in something of a golden age of democracy reform. There are more organizations than ever that are working on structural things like changes to the voting system, or reducing the influence of money in politics, or working on bridging divides and reducing polarizations. There are literally hundreds and hundreds of groups out there across the country and around the world doing all of this work, and it's a movement of many movements, and one that is growing stronger every day.
Great, great. I saw on your LinkedIn that, or one of your LinkedIn posts recently, maybe a week or two ago, where you posted about this exhibition. Um, and um, and so I looked at the picture, and there was a question there, I think, that you posed. And I think in the text of the post, you asked the question, "What does democracy mean to you?" And then the answer came back, "People, power to the people," or something along those lines, right?
Yeah, that was the most popular response that we received. We were at an art museum on campus. They had an evening event around civic engagement. So there were people there registering students to vote. And then we were there doing this activity, "What does democracy mean to you?" And this power to the people theme came up in varying ways over and over again.
Okay. So what do you think they meant? I'm sure there's not one meaning, but what do you think is the thrust of what they meant by power to the people?
I think it just means making your voice heard, whether that is through your vote or through going to an event, a rally, a protest, a town meeting, or even being engaged on social media. That is certainly one way that many people, especially our student demographic, likes to make their voices heard. So I think just the ability to do that, even if not all of it fits within a classic definition of democracy. I think it's true that in an authoritarian environment, it's harder, or if not impossible, to do all of those things. The role that people have in shaping politics and society and culture is much diminished. And so I think the students and the community members I talk to feel grateful for those freedoms that we have here in the US.
Yeah. So do you think that when they said power to the people, they meant power to people as opposed to power to some other entities?
Yeah, I mean, I think they meant power to the citizenry as a collective.
As opposed
Um,
to, I guess I'm trying to, because for me, once I hear somebody say power to the people, it seems to be like a protest against the status quo, perhaps, where the power is not.
oh,
Mm.
yeah, I think there's probably some of that too. There's Gen Z and millennials are the highest percentage of independent voters, right? I think there's definitely, we hear all the time at events and talking with students about a sort of a pushback against the two-party system. And so I think there definitely is that strain as well of, anti-establishment of sorts, or wanting to change systems and power and all of those kinds of things.
Okay. Do you feel that currently, say, your average citizen who believes that, you know, participating in democracy consists in voting, not more than that. I think that most people feel that way,
Mm-hmm.
unfortunately, right? At least I feel so. fortunately, that they think that's what. Do you think that they believe that that minimum, the bare bones democracy is under threat, or do you think that they believe that we are strong enough so that we will continue to have the status quo? Um, Meaning, is there concern, do you feel, is there under current concern on the average citizen that even that kind of democracy where you have some kind of an influence, minuscule it may be, in my opinion, through simply voting, is being threatened?
Yeah. Not that I hear. I mean, I'm talking mostly with people in Pennsylvania, and, we have a fairly robust voting mechanism, not as robust as some other places, but you can vote by mail, you can vote, you can change your registration up to like 2 weeks before the election, so that, one of the things that I'm going to be spending a lot of time doing this fall is helping students decide whether to register on campus or at their home address, and how
Mm.
to, navigate all of those things. But if I talk to people in other states, the answer may be different. I don't know. I haven't done that, so I don't really want to speak too
Yeah.
far there. But I do know that the voting landscape, or the democracy landscape, is different state to state. There's a writer named David Daly, who I've interviewed a few times, and he's described it as democracy deserts, where, sort of like a food desert or that kind of thing. The ability that citizens have to influence their government, is under attack in some places.
Okay. Um, so in the description of your podcast, when the people decide, I saw that. So I've listened to, I think the last season. I think you have two seasons, right, or
Mhm.
two? Three.
Yes.
Yeah. So the last season, I think eight episodes or so. So listen to that. Very very good work. Excellent work, actually. I really
Thank you.
appreciate the work you're doing, and the quality as well. Um, Really good stuff. So you said that the podcast explores the promise, right, of democracy as well as the perils.
Mhm.
What do you think are the perils of democracy?
Yeah, so I think that's referring to the first season of the show was all about ballot initiative campaigns, so citizens bringing issues directly to the ballot. And like anything in politics, there have been ways that corporations and other actors have used that tool of the ballot measure to push forward things that benefit them, regulation changes, or things that are sort of against that power to the people model, right? So it's a tool that does have promise, and that there are citizens out there who see something that they want to be different, something that they want to have changed, and they use this ballot initiative as a way to do that. But the tool doesn't discriminate against who can use it. So people with varying interests are able to use it as well. It's just another tool in their toolbox to influence power and wield power. So I think that's what I was getting at. And I wanted to make sure that we explored both of those facets in that season, because there is a tendency sometimes in the democracy space to be overly rosy about some of this stuff, and not talk as much about the potential drawbacks. So that's what I was thinking of there.
Okay. Okay. Um, so so you mentioned 2016 Brexit and Trump,
Mm.
right? Maybe this is where you believe there's perils, right? Where many people who didn't vote before, maybe that's the desert, right? Came out and voted. People who didn't vote for, and that's why I think a lot of these polls, I remember 90% in the morning of Tuesday, November, whatever it was, Clinton was a shoe in almost, right?
Mm-hmm.
And then as the day progressed, it was clear that almost every single poll was completely wrong, right? To be honest with you, I don't know how these folks continue to be listened to, these experts, right? They continue to just shamelessly say whatever as if they knew what they were talking about. But during that day, I think the big mistake, I think, right, and I'm not sure, is that they didn't realize that their poll didn't account for folks who never voted before who came out and voted, Now, theoretically, the more people vote, the more democracy we are seeing,
Hmm.
right? And if the majority of the people did vote for somebody that I believe is awful, um, that is the will of the people, and one can say that democracy has worked, repellent as the result may be. So, if you believe that something went wrong there, what went wrong in terms of the mechanism of democracy?
Yeah. Well, I mean, I think that it's interesting, the whole kind of will of the people question, because of the how the electoral college functions in the US. Several recent presidents who were in office did not actually win the popular vote. They won the popular vote in enough states to get 270 electoral votes. And so I think that is an issue, and one that there are people out there doing work to try to correct. I'm actually doing an interview next week with some folks from the National Popular Vote campaign, which is an effort to get states to sign on to agree to use the results of the popular vote when they pledge their electors. I don't want to get too deep into it. They're the experts, not me, but folks can Google National Popular Vote if they want to learn more. Or listen to the episode that'll be coming out on Democracy Works at the end of August. But there is real movement to really make the popular vote more effective and really have the will of the people reflected, more so than it is with the reliance on the Electoral College right now.
Yeah, actually, I interviewed, I'm forgetting her name, of that organization last year.
Oh,
And,
great.
and that interview will be part of the series when we get this thing into a book. And that's very interesting what they're doing. So let me then just continue pushing and playing devil's advocate. But in the UK with Brexit, it was not a matter of, it was a majority that decided that they didn't want to stay in the Euro. So where was the problem there?
I mean, so I'm not an expert on UK politics. I only know what I've heard in the news, but I remember hearing something, people went in to vote, and then after that Googled what is Brexit. So there's like a information, like I don't know if it's media literacy or a voter education problem. And people that run ballot measure campaigns run into this too. I heard this all the time with when the people decide. When you have a simple yes, no question, you can really manipulate things to have people think that no means yes and yes means no. So I'm sure that went on in the Brexit campaign about manipulating what people thought they were voting for, or what the benefits were or were not. So I think some of it just comes down to trying to figure out how to get reliable, accurate, easy to consume information to voters before they make their decision. And that is a Herculean task. I don't know that anybody has really solved that yet, especially as our media landscape grows ever more complex.
Well,
So I'm not saying that's the only thing that went wrong, but I know that there was, I think, some of that, people not really understanding what exactly it was that they were voting for.
okay. Um, and again, I'm trying to just go deep into this
Hmm.
question. So it's not me trying to argue for one or the other.
Mm.
But I think in Kansas, was it Kansas or the first vote where they tried to sneak into their constitution, how, something that was against abortion rights, right? And they framed the question in such a way, and they placed it at just the wrong time, hoping that all of that rigmarole was going to
Hmm.
throw off the populists, but the populists did not get thrown off because they cared. I think they cared, and perhaps so. There's an example of where the people are smarter than we think, and perhaps maybe Brexit, the people knew what they were doing. So my question to you really is that when the majority votes, and let's say they were completely informed, and it is something that violates some of your values,
Hmm.
are you going to
Yeah.
say democracy is not working, or are you going to say,
No, no, that is the system working as intended. I mean, the thing about democracy is that if you lose, you have the ability to try again. And so yeah, just because I might not agree with the outcome of a decision that and I think we've seen that, right? I mean, when Trump was elected, there overnight a whole resistance movement sprung up that didn't exist before, right?
Yep.
And Barack Obama was elected, a resistance movement of sorts, and the Tea Party sprung up, right? So there are these countervailing forces, but the ability to have those is, I think, another hallmark of democracy. It's not just like an autocratic or authoritarian country where any repression is quashed, the election is democratic on paper, but sort of fixed long in advance, right? And so I think that there's always going to be some of that back and forth. And, even though there's a sense of disappointment initially, you have to move into, okay, well, now we have to fight the next battle or try to win another day if it's something that you feel strongly about. And I think you've seen that with the reproductive
Yeah.
rights, when the Dobbs decision came down, all of a
Yep.
sudden all of these campaigns in Kansas and Michigan and all, dozens of states sort of sprung into action to try to protect some of those rights at the state level.
Yeah. Yeah. For me, I'm really optimistic in the following sense. Not only about you, in the sense that these threats are waking people up so that they understand that democracy is not where you just go and vote. You got to be involved. You got to mobilize. You got to take it seriously because the effects are not trivial. The effects are real. Devastation can happen, and very, very bad decisions can be, taken in your name, and you have nothing. I guess we deserve the leadership that we tolerate is my sort of motto, right? And so, for example, like you said exactly, right? When Trump came in, there was a lot of grassroots from the left, right? That were just
Mhm.
dormant.
Mhm.
They were dormant. They took it for granted. Um, and so for me, when I hear that democracy is under threat because all these, I don't know, these people that we don't agree with are participating, I say, well, you know what? Let's get our act together. Let me go grab some friends and let's go and mobilize. As opposed to some other stuff that I'm hearing, like, hey, we need to clamp down on speech, uh,
Mhm.
hate speech and all that kind of, which just creates a whole, I think, a um the opposite of a healthy dynamic,
Mhm.
right? And so anyway, so let me
Yeah,
ask.
can I say one
Yeah,
thing on that
yeah,
point
sure.
about the getting the leaders, we get the leaders we deserve. I think there is some truth to that, but I think that there are some structural things at play that make it more difficult to get a leader that is representative of their constituents. I'm thinking of gerrymandering, right? There's a saying that if a place is heavily gerrymandered, politicians get to pick their voters, not the other way around. So I think that's another thing that, again, I will point to the great David Daley, who wrote a whole book on this, about how this sort of, there was a concerted effort over a decade to really advance gerrymandering in a number of different places. And so that is, I think, something that happened while a lot of people weren't looking, or there was a sense of complacency. This work kind of happened behind the scenes because it's sort of wonky and technocratic and a little boring to think about. It's not as easy to grasp as fighting for reproductive freedoms and those kinds of things. So I think that there are some ways that the system has been changed or makes it harder, makes more of an uphill battle for people to mobilize systemic change.
Yeah, no, I agree with that, but I would say that that systemic change, didn't just happen. It happened through agency. Some folks got together and did it. And if people have time, this is sort of my take. If people have time to know the minutia of their sports team and
Mm-hmm.
follow up to the umpteenth, and they spend hours upon hours during the weekend and then during weekdays, and they just pay bare minimum attention, right? The system is exactly what they deserve, right? So I'm a hardline kind of a guy who says it's our fault, period. Period. For example, term limits, right? We all holler around about term limits and term limits, or campaign finance reform, which are fundamentally, poisonous, in my opinion, to democracy, right? We just talk and talk and talk and do nothing that is of substance, right? And we are in our millions, and we spend our time doing nonsense compared to this stuff, right? So whenever I talk to someone, I sort of get riled up a little bit about, okay, why don't you be quiet, and take it as it is, or get involved. And there are a million ways to get involved, like contact Jenna, for example.
Yeah, no, that's right. And I think that's one of the reasons that I wanted to tell some of the stories that I did in When the People Decide, because there are everyday people who have jobs and who have families and who have other responsibilities that have found time in their lives to do these things. And it's sort of a, if they can do it, so can I, so can you, so can we.
Yeah,
all of
yeah,
these kinds of things,
yeah.
and trying to tell those stories in an accessible way.
Yeah, and it's not now I'll just sort of soften it a little bit in the following sense. I think there are forces out there who understand fully what it means for a populace to be completely engaged, and they don't want that, right? And so there are machinations to sort of try to get people not involved, maybe create this divisive issues that are not really pertinent to our what matters, and so on. I mean, Bush, I remember, the second was really good at that in 2004, where the campaign was about some stupidities, right? As opposed to the war and the economic situation and disaster he was creating. It was, I don't remember exact, Carter was the genius behind all that. And they create some wedge issues. And then the whole conversation was, and then he managed, I was shocked that he was able to be reelected after the disaster that he got us into. So just, if there is going to be fighting, it's got to be fighting at many levels, awareness as well as, countering all these moves by the other side. So let me ask you this: do you yourself believe that democracy is under threat? And if you do, in what sense is it under threat?
So I'll say I tend not to buy into some of the hysteria that you hear on cable news and other places. I think in part because I spend my days talking to people who are out there doing all this work and all these groups and trying to affect change in their own way. And I guess what I'll say is that as long as people still have the ability to do that, I don't see as much of a threat. But in the sense, and we're already seeing with the ballot measure, where some states are passing things through the legislature that make it more difficult for people to get a ballot measure passed, because the legislatures don't like what the citizens are putting forward, right? So they're changing signature requirements or adding more hoops for people to jump through. So those kinds of things, I think, are a threat.
Yeah.
And to what you were saying before about apathy, I think that's also a big threat. If people just feel like, there's nothing I can do. Yeah, I'm just going to watch the football game, or I'm just going to do this or that. I'm going to focus on myself and my family and not really worry about what's happening in my community or in our country or in our state. So I think that's a threat. I am less concerned about MAGA and all of those things from a partisan perspective. I guess I think about it more from a community focus, or more from some of the structural things.
Right. Sort of the machine that tinkering with the machine, or tampering with.
You've been listening to Humanity 8.0 with your host, Dr. Ahmed Bouzid, founder and CEO of Witlingo.